Once again invite
by asking you all on various business and partnership models from your experience. Any insights on what you have seen as pros and cons of the model? We'll start with you first, Masood.
So thank you very much, Chandra, for firstly for organizing this conference. I think in the pandemic time, for all of us to get together, I think is really very good, and also for inviting me as a panelist. With regard to your question in particular, I think there are obviously many partnering models in the aerospace industry. I mean, if you go back in time, there isn't anything that hasn't been explored. Each of them has its pros and cons, and at the end of the day, I think each one of them has to be tailored to the particular situation. If you look at India in particular, I think it gets a little more complex. While on the one hand we speak about the low labor cost arbitrage that we have, however, in the aero engine industry in particular, the labor component is quite small, which means by definition you are investing in machinery. And there, I think it gets a little tricky because the cost of capital in India is quite high. And in order to be globally competitive, I think the business structure that you arrive at becomes extremely critical. So on the, I mean, if you look at what the Tata Group has done in aerospace and defense, there is of course a lot of work that we do on the aero engines with GE, but there is also a fair amount of work we do on the aerostructures side. And if you look at the nature of partnerships, I think it pretty much spans all manner of partnerships. So we have what I will call strategic subcontracts, long-term contracts with pre-agreed terms and conditions that span many years, sometimes more than a decade. We have joint ventures, we have teaming agreements. I mean, these are the three broad ones that are there. There is a fourth that's emerging, of course, which is acquisitions. All three of them have benefits and pluses and minuses. So somehow I think most companies tend to think of joint ventures as the default option. It's easier to explain. I mean, in India in particular, everybody thinks that you have a JV, you just go and tell the MOD, oh, I have a JV, and then it's done. But the operationalizing and running a JV is not easy. I think at the end of the day, what you have to realize is that a JV, in the classical sense, has to be a fully functioning JV which is living and breathing and has all the functions which are living and breathing. I mean, you should have sales and marketing, you should have a proper manufacturing base, you should have a manufacturing roadmap as to what else you will intend to do. Sometimes what happens is that you end up making what I will call project JVs, that you end up taking what can actually be done through a simple subcontract and converting it into a JV. What you're hoping to do is to actually get whatever the spillover benefit of saying that you've formed a firm partnership. But at the end of the day, while you end up achieving that, there's a whole degree of hassle that comes with it. Because the moment you get into a company, costs get loaded onto it. I mean, frankly, if you have a company, you need to have a CEO. If you have a CEO, you need to pay him well. Otherwise, he'll also say, "Yaar, tumne JV to bana liya, paisa to de nahi rahe." And that adds cost to it. Now, you've got the CEO, what will he do? It's a plant, he's equivalent to a plant head. So now that CEO will also feel that I have to go and do something. That also causes a complication. Then of course you have, when you're working with a foreign company, a lot of them are listed. So then you have SOX compliance. So then you have to have a compliance officer and a company secretary and all of that. So you start off by saying you're low cost, but ultimately you shoot yourself in the foot by creating all these structures. In my opinion, a JV works well only if you have some kind of runway. No sense just saying that, okay, listen, there's this one project, I have it lying somewhere, let's move it to India, let's form a JV, we'll do a nice photograph, I'll put it on Facebook, my family will like it, I will feel nice for 3 days, and then you have to run the JV, which is a terrible thing to do. You should have a runway, you should have a growth roadmap, you need to see what is going to turn the JV into. If you don't have that, stick to a strategic subcontract or just do a simple subcontract. It's easier for everybody. There's no unnecessary pretenses that go with it. And it's the simplest structure that works.
Thank you. Thank you for those insights. Just moving on to the next question. You know, COVID has affected us all. We see that the pandemic has affected the industry also very significantly. What is it that you're seeing is how post-COVID the aerospace supply chain would evolve, and what, as your leaders in your organizations, are one of those top 3 things you would be doing across?
No, so I completely agree with what Mr. Venkatesh and Karthik have said. Just add a few more insights here. I think we all agree that COVID is what is called a perfect storm. I don't think the world has seen anything like this. So if you look back at the various crises, it has always been something or the other. Economic downturns, fear of traveling, recession, many, many things. Or it was localized. So the last thing that probably hit flying to the extent that it did was SARS. But that was again limited to a certain part of the world. And also it was not for the time duration that we saw. If you see COVID, I think what has hit the industry very, very badly is the fact that it's global. It's combined, there's been an economic recession, there's fear of flying, and it just went for a really long time. I think a year or maybe even more. Nobody thought it would go that long. If you look at what this has meant for companies, I think this has truly shown all of us, one as leaders and two also as employees. It clearly has held up a mirror to what we are as organizations. And at the end of it, it's a mirror that is not very complimentary. The view that I personally have taken is that it is very, very important, certainly as leaders, to make sure that we are taking the right decisions at that point in time. Because whatever decisions you may take will have many, many long-term repercussions. How you deal with your employees, what you communicate to your employees, how you deal with the panic that they have, how do you deal and assuage the uncertainty that they have. I think those will have long-term repercussions in terms of how your own organization will be there for the future. The same thing happens with your suppliers. How you deal with your suppliers. Do you deal in panic? Do you make the situation worse? Do you flap around like a headless chicken? Or you're calm about it? I think that the true DNA of the company comes out in times of uncertainty. And I think as leaders, it's very, very important what kind of behaviors we model, because people feed off your own behavior. If I step back again and look at the industry, I think it's fairly clear that the industry will bounce back. I think it's a matter of time. What is undefined is the time. The fundamental desire to travel has not gone away. I think we all want to travel. We all want to go and meet family. We all want to go and see new places. We also want to go and meet colleagues to do new business. So that will bounce back. I think the interim period is the one that we need to look at. Again, I'll step back here for a minute on what it means for companies. And there's a term that one of my colleagues shared with me some time back, what is called technical debt, which is that companies tend to take decisions. And usually a lot of those decisions are very short-term in nature. You don't look at the longer picture. And you say, listen, there's a quarterly target I have to make. Let me, burn off some inventory. And let me do some stuff. And there's a series of small decisions. And you build up what is called technical debt. Now, when the industry is doing well, it's okay. It's really not a problem. There's a Ponzi cycle that's happening. So you keep rotating it and you're okay. When you have an event like COVID, all that technical debt comes to haunt you. Suddenly all the skeletons that you had in the closet come out and they have a life of their own. And what this has caused is that, my own opinion, the aerospace supply chain is going to be devastated. I think there's a whole lot of companies that have been funded by private equity companies globally that have continued to take these short-term calls to improve their valuation. And those, I think the news is already out in the market of several of them collapsing. So I think the aerospace supply chain is go through some serious bloodbath. Not just supply chain, I also believe a lot of OEMs will go through some severe strife. I think other than the big two, or big three, which is GE, Airbus, and Boeing, which are also facing problems. But the others, it's going to be really, really difficult. The way that I would actually see it is that if you have a long-term view of the industry, it is an adversity. But with every adversity also comes an opportunity. And at the end of the day, I think aerospace industry is a long-term industry, which requires a long-term focus. If you have a long-term focus, and there are some companies which didn't have that long-term focus, I think they could benefit from your long-term focus. So while there is an adversity, I also see it as an opportunity.
Thank you. Thanks for those insights. Probably one of the last questions is, you've been seeing the Indian industry very closely, and what is it that do you think that the foreign OEMs, the large enterprise like yours, and the small and medium companies, a lot of small and medium companies out there in the audience, can do more to make India more self-reliant, in short, Atmanirbhar?
So I have a different take on this. I think this is a cultural issue for us. And the problem that we have is Indians as a whole tend to undersell themselves. I think we tend to, I don't know, maybe it's our family conditioning or the way we are brought up or whatever. But we tend to believe that we should enter a situation or any new area underplaying ourselves. And it is always, we are told, undercommit and over-deliver and all of that stuff, which is very good. But what it does is that we tend to start any new project or any new challenge with diffidence. And what that does is that you then start setting lower and lower standards for yourself. I think the first thing we need to do, if we really need to be self-reliant, is to be self-reliant, which is to firstly start believing in what we are and what we are capable of. I think somewhere we have this nagging doubt that we are not good enough, that we are not as good as some of the other nations. So that firstly we need to take out of our heads. From my own experience, whatever I've seen across the world, I believe that the Indians are probably the most intelligent people I've seen. We are also the most hardworking, and we are also the most ruthless. The biggest problem that we have is we don't believe in ourselves. And what that does is that it causes us to start finding excuses as to why we can't do something. I think the biggest thing that we have to do is to firstly start believing in ourselves and believing we can make something happen. So when we say that there is something being made in Japan, I think the first question that comes to our mind is, oh, how will I do it? No. The answer is, yeah, I'll do it. If the Japanese can do it, so can I. And I will find ways and means to do it. Yes, there are problems, but I will find ways to overcome it. There is a talent shortage? Fine, I will train it internally. But I'm very, very clear that just the way I have problems, there are other countries also that have problems that they overcome. There is no perfect environment. There are no perfect factor conditions. So the Japanese can also say, oh, I have an aging population, I can't do this. Oh, it's so expensive to do. We don't hear that, right? They find a way to make it. So every country has different factor conditions. There are some things that they're good at, there are some things that they're not good at. But I think what differentiates other nations from ourselves is that they don't ask for what I will call subsidies or lower standards of performance. You want it in a year, we'll deliver it to you in a year. They're not bothered whether you don't have roads, you don't have electricity, you don't have people. That approach needs to come in us. I think the moment that approach comes in us, that regardless of what challenges we have, we will overcome, that self-reliance will come. So my thing is, the only thing we should look at is change our mindset. We are no less than anybody in the world. You look at Google, Apple, all of these big companies, all run by Indians. So obviously we're not short of intelligence, right? We're just short of the right framework and the right thinking. That's what we need to bring in India. And there's nothing that we can't do here. I've personally seen it in the companies that we run.